Hello, good evening, and welcome to QTV. And well, joining me in this very special edition is the managing director of the Gambia Ports Authority, Mr. Usman Jubate, also historian at the National Council for Arts and Culture, Hasum Sise, and the commissioner, communications officer at the Gambia Ports Authority, Yankuba Mane. The Gambia Ports Authority this year continues its celebration of the Golden Jubilee. And for those of you who have been following the media, we have been on different media platforms celebrating by sensitizing or making noise around this big festivity. 50 years is not 50 days. The Gambia Ports Authority, by an act of Parliament, was established on the 1st of July 1972, and the port felt it necessary to commemorate the event this year. Like I said, my panel is here with me, and we will look at the development of the port prior to it becoming a public statutory body, it becoming a public corporate body, the aftermath, and of course what the port envisages, the management envisages the port to be. Let me first of all welcome my panelists. MD, welcome.
Good evening, Malik, and good evening to all viewers of QTV.
And of course our historian, Hasum Sise, welcome to have you once again.
Good evening, dear viewers.
And of course, communications officer at the Gambia Ports Authority, Mr. Yankuba Mane. Yankuba, welcome.
Good evening. Badingol Albert Dawo Darek Jiberola QTV program wala mialonko Gambia Ports Authority wala bela Sanjitaru la Jurarola Okacha wala be tenten kan bi fana jam studio.
We'll begin with a flashback. Hasum, the Gambia Ports Authority, before it became a statutory public institution.
Thank you very much. Like we said some time back, we really have to appreciate the beginning of the Gambia Ports Authority by noting that the Gambia has always had a riverine and a maritime-based economy. In fact, as we speak, there are a lot of studies, like scholarly work, saying that maybe we should really, revert back to some of that, riverine and maritime, base, economy, if you want. But at that time, almost everything was as a result of the river, or if you like, in spite of the river, or despite the river, and of course, the Atlantic, from, like trade, international trade, like internal trade, communication, like linking the Gambia with the outside world. You had this regular, like ocean-going vessels, linking, the Gambia, with the West African coast and with Liverpool, the Elder Dempster line, and internally also, you had this, weekly, riverboat service, linking, Batos, to the rest of the country. And really our economy and way of doing things was so much independent, on this marine, facilities, which is one reason why at a very, very early stage in the colonial period, the colonial government was very, very conscious, of developing, wharfs, and of course, what later became as the, port of Banjul, and the whole infrastructure, associated, with maritime and marine exploitation. But this was a colonial period, and the idea was really to give as much, sort of advantage to the European firms, as possible, such that each European firm, trading company, had your own wharf. So basically, the government's, marine department was more like a regulatory, body, regulating all these wharfs. And then what the Port Authority did when it was established, as a statutory, parastatal in 1972, was like, to really centralize, okay, all the, like port operations and also the river transport operations. And as time went on, ferries, were added to it, and so on and so forth. So really, the Port Authority, as it is now, plays a central role, okay, in the economic development, of the country.
I will want to hold you there for the time being and allow ourselves to reflect on the history of the time. When you mentioned there were European firms that operated their own firms, their own wharves,
yeah.
Can you name who were in operation at the time?
Well, yes, the area from where the customs headquarters is now, up to where the, ports, the head office is now, all that, shoreline, was dotted, with wharves. Palmin Wharf, Sakis Madi Wharf, Viku Peterson Wharf, Bartes Wharf, Amaral Eprom Wharf. And then you had Admiralty Wharf, where the governor, only the governor's, yacht, used to dock. And then, of course, you had Government Wharf, where, like Apapa, the Elder Dempster ship, used to dock. And, of course, ships also used to, to dock. But each of these European trading companies had independence. They had their own fleet of river vessels. And some of them even, ordered goods, from abroad, and when these ships came, they will dock at their, wharfs, So each a European company also had your own labor force, you see, your own dockers, So it was quite a complicated, or maybe, we can say quite an unregulated, phenomenon before, the advent of the, GPA in 1972. And you can imagine, what his predecessors, must have gone through, at the very, very early days, trying to, regulate. For example, from the archives, I saw that the first thing they did, was to, agree on the tariffs, like to make the tariffs uniform, across the board. Okay, like tariffs for the warehousing, for the porterage, like the daily wage for the, for the dock workers who are now all centralized under the ports. And this we are going to into some few minutes. The ports also played a very, very important role in like the unionization, okay, of workers in this country. Because these dock workers, they were really the heartbeat of the economy. That is why they organized the first industrial strike in the Commonwealth in 1929, which led to the creation of the Gambia Labour Union under Edward Francis Small. And that was really the beginning of trade unionism in this country.
In 1972, by an act of Parliament, the Gambia Ports Authority was established. Usman Jubate is the current managing director of the Gambia Ports Authority. What did your predecessors leave that you are leveraging on right now?
Well, thank you, Malik. That's a very interesting question and very expansive in nature. But what I can say with certainty is that ever since the early 90s, when I joined the Ports Authority, I have worked through several managing directors, and all throughout there were transformational changes that were introduced to sustain and improve the port business, like my colleague has just elucidated on the importance of the port as a gateway to the national economy. I could vividly remember during the early days, around 1992, we used to have a lot of traders and regional clients come to virtually sleep on doorsteps of shops around the Wellington Street area, waiting for shops to open to buy wares and take to third countries. So the port really is the gateway to the economy in the sense of facilitating most of our exchanges with the international trading circles. Now, at that time, the managing director in the person of Pa Omar Bicham, commonly known as Pacham, saw it fit to transform the port into a new setup. And that's where the idea of setting up the Banjul Freeport and the Trade Gateway Initiative all started. And the government had mobilized a task force to understudy Mauritius and Singapore with a view to launching the maritime teleport, linked also with the telecommunications as a gateway and also the airport. So it led to the cabinet passing a cabinet resolution in 1993 called the Trade Gateway Initiative. And that's how some areas within the port, around the port of Banjul, in the Halfda area particularly, and areas also around the airport were designated as the free trade zone or the trade gateway zone, as we later came to know about it. Successive MDs also used this as a launchpad to initiate other projects that were meant to really transform the port as a catalyst for socio-economic development. And with the change of government in 1994, of course, as one of the speakers had mentioned in an earlier program, we experienced a little bit of a setback in terms of the foot was taken off the pedal a little, but notwithstanding the likes of the late by Ibrahim Jagana, who was the MD just immediately with the new government, and Oliver Andrews, also pushed on this agenda and tried to implement the Banjul Freeport concept in 1994, where the idea really was to transform the port into a maritime trading post, not only for receiving goods and channeling them to their final destination, but to set up industries around the port that would really add value and create more growth in terms of the throughput. Later on, other MDs came into the fray, the likes of Adam Adin, also particularly around the late 90s or early 2002 to be more precise. Also continued with this transformation and particularly launched the transformation of the dock workers, because this was the time when really we needed to do some institutional reforms to unbundle the port, whilst other infrastructure improvements are also being lined up. And one of the things that I particularly remember was the cabinet decision, or at parliament level, to forward the repeal of the dock labor scheme. As you rightly mentioned, this dock labor scheme was by a labor ordinance of 1961, even prior to the ports being created. And because they were not covered and contractual engagement with the port, that's why we were saddled with this problem of dock workers presumably having this notion of jobs for life. And Mr. Dean was very instrumental in passing the decision through the parliament at the time, and cabinet took a decision to repeal the dock labor scheme so that the changes will be ushered in. Also, it coincided with the transfer of the ferry services to the Gambia Ports Authority also in 2001 by government decision, because of the synergy that ferry services has with the port operations, and the fact that the erstwhile company that was handling the ferry services was a little bit struggling with the huge capital and financial resources that were required to maintain the ferry services operations. And Adama was very instrumental in that transformation to see that ferries has been now injected with some new financial resources and also management assistance to be able to sustain and improve the reliability of services that were provided across the river. And this led us to engage the likes of Diamond Shipyard for the procurement of new ferries, which were actually delivered in 2002. These are the likes of Kanilai, Soma, and Farafenya ferries. Also, the human resource was also another strength of Mr. Dean, because he instituted the human resource capacitization of most of the staff to enhance more training. That's why in one of your programs, Mr. Guy Axi, Doyen, mentioned that the port was a center of excellence when it comes to human resource and training and capacity development, because a lot of professionals were trained in the ports, not only in the marine, but in the other fields of academia, like professionals in engineering, in accountancy, and related fields. Then came Mr. Jiba, Mohammed Lamin Jiba, around 2004, and he served for a long period, more than 8 years. And he continued on with these transformational changes also, particularly dealing with the HR issues, to ensure that a lot of training was opened up and capacity building, particularly for the technical vocation. And female folk were also introduced in trades that were predominantly male-dominated. You had female engineers, you had female operators, you had female navigators. This all happened during that period that Mr. Jiba was there. And it reached to a point where our relationship with tertiary institutions, particularly the Regional Maritime Academy then, and later now to the Regional Maritime University, so and sustained collaboration. And it was improved to the level that Gambia was recognized as one of the pioneers in developing the academy into now a university. And in fact, one of the hostels that was built through the personal intervention of Mr. Jiba had government to invest almost $400,000 in building a hostel for students at the RMU, which is still celebrated, and it's called the Gambia Hostel. Mr. Jiba also pioneered what we call the OPES, our program, in 2006, because it happened that we ran an advertisement in the local newspapers to recruit, if my memory serves me right, staff within one of the technical areas. And after the advertisement had run out, we did not receive any applicant. So he saw that there's a gap in the skills in that particular trade. And to his mind, the only way we can fill that void is to ensure that there's vocational training, particularly in professional disciplines related to science and engineering. That's how the idea of OPES was mooted. And up to now, we grant scholarships to students studying at the University of the Gambia in all of the sciences discipline. More than 150 students are sponsored annually since 2006. More than $10 million is we pay as tuition and other fees to the university on an annual basis. It gave a new dimension to training in sciences, taking cue from the STEM, which is the science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine. These are some of the changes that Mr. Jiba also ushered in. And later on, successive MDs like Abdullah Tambedu and Lamin Sanyang also saw through this project. And it came about that the third port project actually started from 2002 when Mr. Dean was there, when we procured new equipment, the ferries and some other fleet of cargo handling equipment and marine craft, all during that time. So these changes has been ongoing. And the launch pad really was from the the trade gateway project that was conceived in the early 90s. But we can talk about that later, maybe when we get into it.
We will talk about that later on, and we will also look at the contributions of 3 managing directors, notably the first managing director, Captain Babakar Salah, who was the first managing director. We'll also look at the managing director in the person of Mamadou Gueye, who signed the first performance contract with government. And we will also look at your input as the current managing director. But let me allow our communications, fair enough.
Yes.
I like that. Let me look at, let's have Yankuba to summarize what has just been said here by both Hasum and the managing director.
A lot has been said. Okay. Badingol kachabe damento walen kaitandi ko mbay jiberola kekang tubabol la jamano biring poro benunja tubabol la maralo kota kaitandi ko konna fonun jan nyame na kachal men tambita ko tubabol ye compagnie jamal de benunja tata fo compagnie woro min yalon ko wolle ba bakono julayala ana tamandinya jang ka julaya ke jiyo kono julaya ka boy gambia la ni bantara bankola ani banko fon kono jang o keta non kulate mi yalon ko kumata num bake o time bal watinata si belin tubabol apana independence so tubabol nata ka finti bal bili finti ta sang ye sotable je sang mansa kunda mbe jan jawara mansa kunda nata nam pour ko sota nyen ko suki wala nata asabu Gambia Ports Authority anata ka nyara ka londe 1972 sangonyen kono July 1st bala tem amandam port damala Gambia Ports Authority yani compagnie nani koteng ye wala londe nyo bal bi konna funu nyame na wol be fatala ports damal wal loring anda ba tamaka hani bi ya londi dalulo men ka bo do ko ke kan na socio economic development wala fanala de ni nata jibe ko o time wala ko nyim porol en ka wol min fo nyim compagnie worol min yalan ko nana sotota non jan tubabo la maralo kon e ko la wafol ben non men tole e ko bi ni ba folo misal fe wala jiare be damento kanana fo poro be damento o ba dandangol be e ko nyin wafol be ba lolo no wallato kilo cling aba fayen anda telekala dokulalta atelekala dokulaljo aba itol danaka itol momo be fayen so bilim poro lota 1972 sangono alpha folol min yalon ko poro ye man say wala marandi poro ala tamandi nyal inata jakkaje ko ka be centralize mo tubabu kan wala ka kol min bebe janjandi faye ke be samanan keke bunda kilin koto min kete Gambia Ports Authority dabo kono ila jolla karola jumalle be dokuo kala je dokulal nyeng ani la nyantol ila akol be nsafo na sutiya ko sutiya kam so doko nim balare wala nyama anata kayitandi ko fana ko jumalle mu dokula fololtinunje nata fo captain Sala nata folonunje na fo kotenke bal bi kacha findita nan damento wolenko pa cham wala managing director Sabanyawati ni bota captain Sala bota je ye John Lee soto e ka pa cham la soto nya managing director kami itande ko ate bilaba doko tala pa cham la banu managing director bal pa cham ala lodulal nyum fana anata ko fana itande ko fana yala development wakela ko managing director min nata ate kola anda daba kono ka fo mi free trade gateway e ko o fana ma o mala icon lati manam o mala doku bundal timi yalon ko te fana o yirwa samana Gambia Ports Authority je te pa cham kola inata ka afo jagana samana jagana mdestane ko ate mantara balulin nyin tembeng balba be dawada rek mba duwala la fo ala sa so Cairo la je ako jagana fana bota nyeba bilin jagana fana kola den nataka Oliver Andrews fana soto ñunu be na ñunu min be foten momo ni nata e ka lodula la ta poro la do koto kadu ko poro mu fennete comme hasum ya fo nyamina amu fennete mi yanga kumata bake ñim banko la tamande nyata surtout ala nafulo la soto na la maraloñi kadu ko niaji be atedda malam port kilomati mi yalon ko wolbe en banko kam bagasol min be ka bonan bantara bankol to kabrin tubabo la jamano fobi abe ka dunna ni wolto la it's a gateway ni ba fa tubabo kawala wala ka dunni wolto andu ni ka findi fana ka findi wol sanata ka jula jamal fo managing director jamal fo min boko lamin jibawol ako lamin jiba ate fana mo ketanu managing director te niajibe bi ako ala niaje musul ka musul dake doku kono mi alon ko doku mi alon ko tul be nun kamin foko nyimmanke musul da dokuode ako lamin jibale o hakil maya anata e musul fana susundu o fannal min boka niajibe ka foko welding niajibe fitaya mechanic you know ani wo doku so ani atrafan ka kulungol fon kulum borondo be e ka telewol fana musul dundi woto so ala doku kumata bake ni nata jibe fana ko regional maritime university min bagana ako Gambia la sutero ka Gambia sute nyin African West African bankol kam bakuno doku wala nala tamandina fo Gambia fo e council wodulata ko ako fana keta mo lamin jibala watolla so ku jamal la ko belu bota je fana mo lamin sanya wol be nata anen tambedo wol min be nata be keta yamaralo kan momo ni nata tonya bawonte be fono la kilinkili yemin fono bal ke tol foten anen kaytande ko yemin doku poro la tamande nyaado nyim banko kan e ko na sute bake nyen sanjital lulu maralo ko ala telecommunication anala telecommunication wala nyomoyote da gamtelo to ani wo sifal da siata bake endi asiata bake mali
Yankuba Nimbara. You couldn't say more than what you've said, and you did extremely well. You're watching a live program on QTV as the Gambia Ports Authority commemorates 50 years when it was, by an act of parliament, made a public statutory body. I mentioned earlier before we went through that short break to allow Yankuba to translate or summarize what we have said in Mandinka. We're looking at the contribution of 3 managing directors. Captain Babakar Sala, first managing director. You have an account of that, Hasum?
Well, yes, he was the pioneer, and you know, he was like a professional in maritime science and nautical science and all that. And I think what Captain Sala had as an advantage was that he came into the job like a lot of experience. You know, but by the time that he became the managing director in 1972, he had really worked, you know, close to 12 years. Okay, like I said, with Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, you know, in the Black Star, you know, line, like he understood, you know, all the, I mean, shipping routes and you know, maritime, I mean, you know, laws and institutions. Because in fact, from the archives, I think as early as September '72, when he was barely like a month into office, he helped to create, and maybe, you know, the MD will explain this, what might have now become this a maritime university, because he went to a meeting in Sierra Leone, and he invited port managers from 17 African countries. You know, this was in the autumn of 1972, and his idea was for them to you know, have like a common platform, okay, so as to be able to standardize. You know, I see him use that word. You know, he was speaking to the journalists when he returned. You know, he used that word, that he, you know, standardize. I know. I mean, he knows what those things mean. You know, as far as maritime affairs is concerned.
Yes, indeed.
You know, so I mean, he had that, you know, international outlook from the very beginning. You know, putting the Gambia Ports Authority at the center, okay, of the development, of ports, you know, in the African sub-region. And when you spoke about the you know, role of the Gambia in the Maritime University in Accra, you know, that you know, came to mind. And also something I find very interesting, just to tell you how central, how strategically important this port is. I mean, when Kukwai Sambasanyang made the coup d'etat in 1981, I mean, he realized that it looks like only two institutions, you know, did not close, you know, down operations. You know, Radio Gambia, you know, he knows a lot about that. Kukwai had to, you know, broadcast.
I was on work.
And the ports. You know, the airport was closed. I mean, and you know, so because I went through the ports, you know, the annual reports for '81, you know, and there Captain Salah was reporting, you know, that, I mean, even in that, you know, terrible weekend of July 30, you know, 31st August 1981, I mean, like the dockers and the porters were, you know, still being escorted, you know, to offload, you know, cargo. You know, just to tell you how strategically, you know, significant and important, you know, so that even Kukwai's rebels, you know, seem to have realized the importance
Of the port.
you know, of not, disturbing the operations, you know, at the port. Yeah.
All right. Then came Managing Director Mamadou Gueye, and he was the MD that entered into the first performance contract with the government of the Gambia. Today, you see that the Port Authority is subscribing a huge amount of money to government. Can you tell us about the performance contract?
Well, yes. Thank you, Malik. Maybe just before the performance contract, I just want to add on to what Mr. Cisse has mentioned about Captain Salah's role in this Port Management Association of Western Central Africa, we call it. Yeah. Because records have it that that meeting was held, as he rightly said, in September of 1972, when the port managing directors in West and Central Africa converged in Sierra Leone to create what was called later now the Port Management Association of Western Central Africa, to create a uniform platform where ports and maritime organizations would share a common platform and exchange and form a common block when it comes to dealing with international maritime issues. So that was really a hallmark, and the association is still surviving, holding biannual meetings, you know, in many sister countries. To be more specific about your question with regards to the performance contract arrangement, records have it that yes, Mamadou Gueye was the managing director at the time when the GPA entered into this arrangement for the setting up of both qualitative and quantitative targets for the institution, which goes with, of course, with reward and also sanctions for non-performance. But it really set the standard for increased enterprise performance by creating the right enabling environment and the incentives to produce the right results. And it happened that the records we have access to have indicated that the whole arrangement was a huge success.
Yeah.
To the extent that when the system was discontinued at some time, this new government saw it fit with this new SOE bill that is being prepared to really reintroduce the performance contract arrangement to ensure that state-owned enterprises are given the enabling environment and the right tools and resources to be able to perform. Because they are created for a purpose, and they're supposed to have a positive impact on the people's life, that's the Gambian citizens. And that's the motivation that this new government has taken to reintroduce that performance contract. So arrangements are in place to have the performance contract reintroduced. But just one anecdote I would like to mention also. Apart from the performance contract, the port was also instrumental in other national projects which well, have some relation with increasing throughput at the port. But these are activities that really, because of the human resource capacity that was at the port at the time, and some of them were trade-related issues, led to the creation of the Corporate Service and Business Development Unit at the Gambia Ports Authority, of which the first manager was Oliver Andrews, who later became the MD. Now, there was a multi-stakeholder task force at government level, and that really led to a position paper being prepared by GPA, and it led to government now approving what later became the Trade Gateway Initiative. And later on, GIPSA and now GIPA can trace their roots and origins since those early days when this idea of the free trade gateway was being mentioned. Ports had some role in it because of the free port concept, but it was related to the maritime teleport and also the trade and telecommunications gateway on the GAMTEL, and also the airport development. So these three services were linked, because at the time the people that were in the ports at the time and government setup realized that this Singapore dream can only be realized as a country because we're endowed with a natural resource. That's the river. And also we have the human resource capacity. So services was really the game changer for the country at the time. That's why there was this idea of Singapore and the Vision 2020. So these were really an offshoot of how the performance contract also transformed into other gains. Even when it comes to procurement, because the GPA was also already exposed to international procurement by virtue of our contracts with the likes of CARE International and Balfour Beatty, who had the contract to construct the new wharf under World Bank procurement guidelines. When the new act was also being promulgated with support of World Bank to government, for government to have a procurement law in place, GPA staff were part of the resource persons that converged at the MDI at the time to assist the consultants in coming up with the necessary legal provisions to lead to the procurement regulation. I can remember people like Nicola Blell, who was our technical services director at the time. We had Aziz Samba as the finance director, and Baigay as the procurement manager, and myself as operations. We were part of the people that assisted government with other government stakeholders to come up with this news. So the port has been central in a lot of things that the government was doing, all taking its cue from the performance contract system that was in place at the time, which was a huge success.
A little bit technical here for you, Yankuba. I guess you'll be able to move around the puzzle and give us a little bit of overview of what this is.
I mean, just a minute. Yeah. I really wanted to, I have something to add to what the managing director has just said.
Yeah, okay.
Because really from the very beginning, like he said, government saw the role of the Gambia Ports Authority in the economy, as central. The GPA's role in the national economy, it was central, because when the board was being inaugurated in 1972, the Minister of Works at the time, Sir Ali Suleiman Jack, said the Ports Authority is eventually meant to provide a public service. Though it is true that profitability was and will remain the yardstick for measuring their efficiency. Of course, we might say that it is not necessarily the case that profit is the objective, but rather the GPA must be able to bring about a reasonable amount of profit with a satisfactory service to the public. the viability of the GPA is, of course, an absolute necessity if we are to build a prosperous Gambia. Yeah, he said that. So really, he had, sort of centered, the port, in the equation of national development as far back as 1972. Yes.
That was the minister speaking.
Yes.
When
yes, at the inauguration of
the board.
Yes. On 7th of November 1972.
And just to remind our listeners that among the board members were the merchant Robert Madi. There was Mr. Plowden, who was an advisor to the port. There was Babukar Sala, who was the MD. There was Mr. Foster, who was at the GPMB, managing director of GPMB. The GUC was also part of the board. And some of the very important people were there as well.
Permanent Secretary,
CTG Senghor,
Permanent Secretary.
Permanent Secretary. Very well. And what amazed me was the fact that there were 13 members of that board, and today boards are very small. At that time, the board was 13 members in that board. But anyway, we'll come back to you later on, MD. For you, we will say, me and you will share something in common. We were both born in our profession. If anybody should know Malik Jones, you know Malik Jones from Radio Gambia. And Os Jobate, everybody knows Os Jobate from the Gambia Post Authority. But let's have a summary of what we've been saying from Yankuba.
Baraka bake hasum boda min karankanjang ako walang kumakawda miyalonko. Minister of Works at the time, Olen Alu Suleiman Jag, ako Jawara Masakundaro, Bilaba Botnying, Olen Mini Marta Body Min Marta Porola Tamandinyal, Menko Jibe, Masakunda Toya. Ako Bilabo address la kadiamuye wo inauguration dulato ako nyum kuma kawle ka I mean kumata jere wala ka porola kuma nyim banko kan ala do an banko la tamande nya ko la itandi board member sola mi ala ko board chair wala Robert Maditi at the time anin 12 orders because 13 more tang anin saba wala ba board nyanton so kay itandi la ko poro nying ala tamande nya akumata bake banko la na ala fankola na ala tamande nya so kuma kan hasum kawala bon but then nkami itandi jang wala rek nka na First Managing Director nala ko jibele min kata Captain Babukar Salati ko Babukar mu katalalti kata bakel katu ko atemu selolti wala bakono kulum borondilala andu na folano kacal tambita ya jejamento jawara ya je gana la ko min kurma bulo samananjang kake First Managing Director kata ko ke bake bele mbota je nata min jibe fana wala mu Captain Modou Gueye afana keta managing director to around 1980s 84 right 84 and telephone keta managing director follow the mialanko aning atata I signero ke wala ka signature ke performance contract with the government performance contract dum wala ini mansa kunda d'accord aliye benkan ko naliye do ko ke albakela nyin silo la nyin fanala naliya ke koteng ñin nebe talale je nal marketing ko temfona ñim punishment wala be talale je wala mu ñomoyoti mi alon ko Gambia Ports Authority ate Modou Gueye koto mi alon ko yo sign ba bilia kenu hasum nata kibaro bonni moli ay min bon national kay tandina ko tonya poro ay katanum bake katu ko bilie nalo nata 11 million de kake dividend ote kabilo dinkirato inataje ko tonya over the years Gambia Ports Authority has been consistently about ala doku ke kan ko ya londe masakunda londe nyamen anda ba ke kan nyala mi alon ko ay nyabo da sila ada tata woto fana foi nata jako belibo dividend on nyin joben tara 11 million te minister no at the time anata etande ko masakunda kontanta porola kola andi say la fakala grato la fala la faka batch killing ka dabotol wala ka bondi from statutory public institution or corporation to a limited liability company bari history ya samana nyamina na historian ya research nyamina ako wo dream nying pour ka port ye futa wo darajola ako janding wo abaka wo dila la man sekunda wo dila atara coup d'etat nata ke 1994 wo fana nata wottinya but then nata ka jebiro ke nata je ko tonya ku jamal la tata ni aju e poroto ala simfal managing director min be fo be la lodulan e ko wala nata fana ka ji kata bantala ka woy ka je ko poro ay doku ke nyim banko kan wala nata ka sabu fo nka gaipa min foten e ko wuluta wala kono gaipa fana kola nko GPPA wala procurement body nyenti o fana nata na wulu wala kono bal Gambia Ports Authority managing director kam itande wala ko afana simfa da balata kaje ko gaipa nyeng because in consultants all international consultants in wolle do ko ke ye blodi nyola ata MDI kono MDI jang pour kaje ko ibo sarrol ning procurement procedures and processes min yalan ko simfala ni nyal mi yalan ko bagaso nyanda kana walla ka bonina ka procure nin ko procure ka kumanni wo silol wo be Gambia Ports loda tajil ala lodula danaka Malik a warata bake nyabo da ba mbolo totembi.
This is a special live program commemorating the Golden Jubilee of the Gambia Ports Authority. With me in the studio, the Managing Director, Usman Jabate, historian at the National Council for Arts and Culture, Hassam Sisay, and Communications Officer at the Gambia Ports Authority, Yankuba Mane. Let me come back to you, MD. You were born in the port. You know the port inside out. Nobody will tell you the Gambia Port Authority.
I'm humbled.
Well, c'est la vie. That's the way it is. What must be, must be. And could you just tell us briefly, well, in totality, the port operation as it is right now and the vision of the port? I know you have a port expansion project. You have bought the whole of Half-Dye. Just a few compounds still remain standing, and you have a you have a grandiose vision for the port of the Gambia. What is that?
Thank you, Malik. As you rightly said, I had spent
your lifetime,
well, virtually in the port, and maybe it's not by accident also because. My grandfather on my maternal side retired at the port, the late Palai Njai. A lot of people know him, especially people in the regions. He worked a long time at Jaring and many other ferry crossing points. And my dad also, late Father Musa Jobate, everybody knows him also. He worked at the ports, at the Marine Department, then as a turner in the mechanical workshop. So I knew Marine going to school. You know, and I was contemporary to the children of Captain Sala, the likes of Ami Sala and Mali Sala and the others. Captain Kamara's children were also at KG together with me, Marcela Kamara and the other chap, I've forgotten his name, and Captain Bokosar in Nigeria. They were all working at the ports then as senior people. So, but their children were in the same primary school like me, you know, KG along Buckle Street. So every lunch break we just used to track the journey and go and meet our fathers to get some small lunch money. Well, what the port is doing right now is actually to regain a lost glory. You know, it's not any excuse being proffered, but the port was really a pioneer in the sub-region. I can just give a small anecdote. We started the first night pilotage around the West Coast, and the late Captain Abdurrahman Ba was the first, he was the harbor master then, to do night pilotage, to bring vessels at night so that the port can be a 24-hour port operation. When it comes to IT, we had the likes of Sal Jack and Simon Abraham, and there was a European national, Phil Connington, if I remember well. We were trying to develop a software using in-house expertise, and at the time we called it POPS, Port Operation Systems. And it reached a point where our neighbors, the likes of Cabo Verde, Abidjan, Port of Ghana, and Senegal, did a lot of engagement with the port through interport cooperation agreements. And they were sending their staff, and we were also sending us in like a staff exchange program, practically to learn about our systems and how come, you know, little Gambia has this talent to be looking at some of these projects that were game changers in terms of our vision. Not to cry over anything, but I believe the potential is still there. So the plan now is to regain a lost glory, because Gambia naturally is a supermarket for the sub-region in terms of both trade and services. Now, what we are doing as a port is to launch what we call the 4th Banjul Port Expansion Project. And we're looking at the immediate facility in Banjul, because we did a master plan in July 2019, which was approved by Cabinet. And it looked at the alternative location of the seaport along the southern coastline. Areas were surveyed between Bijilo up to Jereng. And Sanyang was found to be the most ideal in terms of relocation, because there's a bay in Sanyang that we can create a breakwater to do the shelter anchorage so that ships can dock. But what the master plan considered was looking at a 20-year demand study. And it came out primarily that the facility can be expanded in Banjul to cater for the present demand that is posed on the facility in terms of extending the wharves and taking the areas in Halfday just south of Cotton Street, going around the mosque area. But just to allay the fears of Banjulians and my co-citizens in Banjul, the expansion, there's a hard border that is already created. That's just to cater for the immediate needs. But what we have launched consciously as a management is to engage government to do a survey around these areas that I mentioned, with a view to coming up with a strategic paper to inform a cabinet decision to declare the Sanyang area as a future port for the country. And why we're not investing right now? Because it needs a breakwater, which according to the estimate, the rule of thumb in this industry, it will require nothing less than $500 million just to create the breakwater, like a seawall, to have a shelter anchorage where ships can dock, not talking about the ancillary facilities and the support infrastructure. So that's why the investment is not making a good, it's not bankable at the moment. It's not a strong business case. But we are anticipating its development. So part of the developments we are doing in Banjul is just to take care of the immediate, such that the next project is going to establish a deep seaport along the southern coastline, and Banjul will be like a river port for the internal.
Let me interrupt. Where will that money come from if you were going to look at the southern part of the country?
Well, we're making a business case, as I mentioned earlier, and we're looking at more at creating the transshipment volumes, because these things, they add up. If you look at the natural restriction coming into Banjul, it's actually, because Banjul is in an estuary, and there's a sandbar somewhere along the channel off the coast of Cape Point, I believe between what we call buoy numbers 2 and 3, sorry. That's like a mountain under the seabed.
It's impeding.
Yes, it restricts the draft of ships that can navigate to 8.5 meters. So there's a project to dredge about 4.6 million cubic meters of sand and to increase the depth to 10.2 meters, at least to attract bigger ships. So if you look at the cost estimate, which was done since the late 1992s, it was around 35 million euros. Now you're looking at $121 million to do the immediate expansion of the port, not talking about the Bond Road widening, and also the river transport revitalization project to do dry ports in Basse and Kauru and the like. These things, they add up. So what we're doing now is to just look at the immediate. But the medium to long term, we're making a strong business case, and there's interest from potential partners to also partner with the port into development of this facility, and also linked with the oil exploration and exploitation potential of this country. Because once those activities start, they would require expansive structures that are not available in Banjul. And really, it strains credibility that you can have this facility and this potential, particularly the river, which is the game changer in this whole arrangement. One of the important scope of our current port expansion project is to revitalize the river transport and use Basse, for example, as a staging post. Because you will realize that the distance between Banjul and our major growth centers in the southwest regions of Mali, southern Senegal, is in terms of distance, is 673 kilometers by road from Banjul. So setting up a staging post in Basse, like a logistics platform, means you're cutting the distance by half, because another 380 kilometers will be short in terms of the distance. So the idea is to drop cargo in Banjul, get them transported by river barge up to Basse, which has all the advantages of being more sustainable and more friendly to the environment, reducing a lot of trucks on traffic from the roads and reducing accidents and carbon emissions. And also our nearest competitor between those ports and these destinations is 1,200 kilometers. So we are closer in terms of distance by almost half. So we can be even enhanced in terms of attractiveness by having this logistics platform in Basse. So our project really is to regain a lost glory for Gambia, because Gambia has a huge potential to be like a sub-region in the sub-region. And this was earlier realized by our forebears in terms of the port management. And that's the project that we are still trying to grapple on. And to mention that some of the transformation we are doing is also to unbundle the institutional arrangements like the stevedoring label. We've recently set up a private stevedoring cargo handling company to take care of the transformation, so that dock workers now go into a new scheme with better terms and conditions, while the elderly people who presumably had these jobs for life because of the inherent weaknesses in the law will be taken care of and compensated so that we can move. This is an old age clamor. Had the likes of late Musa Jain, you had the Mbai Hardings, the Omar Betikan Preras, they had the Scarlett Janis. These were all people that Sol Njais and Senis, they were all Alaji Kemba Gassama. They were all in for these changes, and they are part and parcel of this whole arrangement. We're also linking it to off-dock sites that we are trying to address. But all of these changes were brought about because of people that had worked in the port and also shared in this vision. It's a shared value, and not only about the male staff, but also prominent female staff were there who were also very supportive in the arrangement. We had the full female manager in the person of Amisi. We had the likes of Nafi Magno, yes, with ADB now, and we had late, I've forgotten her name again. She was a senior person in the administration. And then you had other female staff there. And Fatal was the doyen. Well, she served under many managing directors. And a host of other people that have contributed.
Today you have your DMD is Nafi McDowell. She is also a daughter of the port.
Yes, indeed. And it's not by default, because Nafi is also a long-serving member of staff in the port. And our policy for being gender sensitive is not only limited to a pronouncement in our service rules, but it's something we practice. As Yankuba may have alluded earlier, we have female in a lot of vocation in the ports, and they are doing the marine, the harmons. And
all right, gentlemen, we're running into a brick wall, and Hasum, maybe we'll just hear your last words as the Port Authority continues to celebrate its 50th anniversary.
Well, yes. I just have a paragraph here. It said on 30th December 1972, the Port Authority has announced that it was taking over all master porterage and stevedoring for all ships breaking bulk or reporting for loading on or after 1 January 1973. The Gambia Port Authority now requires prescribed delivery order and shipping note set in respect of any cargo discharged from or loaded into ships. The shore handling rates, which were published in the Gazette yesterday, included provision of labor, mechanical handling equipment for loading, delivery, and shipment, and no other payments should henceforth be made to shipping agents.
Thank you very much. Managing Director, your last words as we come towards the end of this program.
Well, we enjoin all Gambians to support the port in its transformational changes, because we are alive to our responsibility as public servants, that all our actions should translate into positive gains for our citizenry. And we are also subject to public scrutiny, and we want the Gambia to be transformed into the supermarket of the sub-region. That's really the ideal, and the port is just one chain in the whole link.
This was a live program on QTV as we commemorate the Golden Jubilee of the Gambia Ports Authority. My guests have been Hasum Sise, historian at the National Council for Arts and Culture, the Managing Director of the Gambia Ports Authority, Mr. Usman Jubate, and Communications Officer at the Gambia Ports Authority, Yankuba Mane. From me, Mala Jones, do have a good night and bye-bye.